Queen Elizabeth II's long rule comes to an end. Hi there, I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English lesson number 506 for Monday, September 26th, 2022. JR is the producer, and he has uploaded the full lesson to plainenglish.com/506. You're learning English, and there is nothing more English than the Queen of England. Elizabeth II died earlier this month at the age of 96 after serving as Britain's monarch for 70 years. In today's lesson, we'll talk about how news spread on the day she died. On Thursday, we'll talk about the strange path she took to becoming queen. And in a future lesson, we'll talk about what the world's most famous monarchy might look like in the future. In the second half of today's lesson, I'll show you how to use the English expression pay respects, and we have a quote of the week. Let's get started. It wasn't a surprise, but it was still a shock. At 6:30 p.m. on September 8th, suited employees posted a framed, written announcement on the exterior gates of Buckingham Palace in London. The statement was 2 short sentences on a white page. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, it said. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. The announcement began several official days of mourning, which ended on Monday, September 19th, with the Queen's funeral. The Queen's health had been in decline in recent years. At her Platinum Jubilee weekend earlier this year, celebrating 70 years of service, she was able to make only 2 very minor appearances on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. She had made limited public appearances over the last year after doctors advised her to make lifestyle changes. She contracted and then recovered from COVID-19 earlier this year. She did, however, make the trip to the Scottish Highlands, where she traditionally spends the summer. But her mobility challenges prevented her from traveling to London to greet Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, who took over on September 6th. Traditionally, the monarch meets a new Prime Minister in Buckingham Palace in London. This time, the new Prime Minister traveled to Scotland to meet the Queen. Analysts say that the Queen's health must have prevented her from traveling. She would not otherwise have broken protocol, they believed. In the official photograph of the encounter, the Queen appeared frail, using a cane indoors and extending a bruised hand to greet the 15th Prime Minister to serve her. The next day, she had to cancel a virtual meeting with the new Prime Minister, and then, early on the day of Thursday, September 8th, Liz Truss was in the House of Commons. She presented a series of actions intended to ease the financial pressure on consumers from rising energy costs. Someone entered the chamber and passed a note to her and to the leaders of other parties. Shortly thereafter, the Speaker of the House told the members that the Queen's health was in decline. The Prime Minister left the chamber. At 12:30 in the afternoon, Buckingham Palace issued a statement saying that doctors were concerned for the Queen's health. In the guarded language of official palace communications, this meant that the end was near. Members of the royal family rushed to Balmoral Castle, a sprawling estate in northern Scotland. Her children, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, and then Prince Charles, arrived to be with her. At 6:30 in the evening, her death was announced. An hour later, Liz Truss, dressed in black, emerged from the Prime Minister's official residence at 10 Downing Street. She said the Queen was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Britain was devastated. About 80% of the population has lived under no other monarch. Residents and visitors began to gather outside Buckingham Palace in London to pay their respects. One resident said she would cry all night. Another said she feared for Britain's future, knowing the challenges the country faces without its stable leader of the last 7 decades. Upon Queen Elizabeth II's death, her son, Charles, became king. He had the option to keep his name, Charles, as his royal title, or to choose another from his full name, Charles Philip Arthur George. He decided to keep his given first name, and he became King Charles III. In a statement, the 73-year-old king said this was the moment he's been dreading, but that he had to keep everything going. He returned to London to meet the Prime Minister and request 10 days of official mourning. On the Saturday after the Queen's death, Charles was officially proclaimed king at St. James's Palace. A coronation ceremony is considered a celebration and is not considered appropriate in a period of mourning. Therefore, the king's official coronation ceremony will be months from now. Britain has not transitioned from one monarch to another in 70 years. However, the process was carefully choreographed following traditions that go back centuries. For most people alive today, it was the first time they saw a new monarch in Great Britain. Rain in London on September 8th added to the gloom, but in the moments before the Queen's death was announced, a double rainbow arced above Buckingham Palace, and a Reuters photographer caught the rainbows on camera behind 2 Union Jack umbrellas. Today's English expression is pay respects. This is a formal phrase, and we usually use it with a possessive. I went to pay my respects is what you might say. And to pay your respects means to make a polite visit. And this is often, but not always, often used when someone has died. You pay your respects to the people who are still living, or you can pay your respects to a grave site or another solemn place. For example, think about the last time you went to a funeral, a wake, or other memorial service for someone you knew. You might have approached the widow, son, or daughter of the deceased person to express your sympathy. You might have given that person a hug or a handshake. You might have said how sorry you were for that person's loss. If you did that, then you paid your respects to the widow or the children of the deceased. However, imagine that you were not very close to the person who died. Imagine that an elderly person on your street has died. In the days or weeks after, you might go to the house and make a polite visit, even if you didn't go to the funeral. In this case, you are paying your respects to the people who are still living. Here's another way to use it. Many countries have national military cemeteries. Here in the US, we have many military cemeteries, but the most famous is called Arlington National Cemetery. It's in Virginia, near Washington, D.C. Many people go to Arlington to pay their respects to the soldiers who died in wartime. In a more general sense, pay your respects can be about showing respect on a solemn occasion. And that is how I used it in today's main lesson about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. After her death was announced, people gathered outside Buckingham Palace to pay their respects. Obviously, they didn't go to greet King Charles III personally, but they went to show their respect for the Queen and to show their support for the royal family. There were a lot of people, but they made a polite visit to Buckingham Palace. They weren't cheering, they weren't drinking, they weren't partying. They went to share stories, light candles, lay flowers, talk to one another, and show their respect for the monarchy and make a respectful gesture. Now, I looked in the dictionary, and the dictionary says that you can also use pay respects in a case when someone has not died. The dictionary says that you can pay your respects to someone who is sick in the hospital. The dictionary says that you can pay your respects by visiting a new neighbor who has moved into a house on your street. Now, I keep saying the dictionary says because I don't think I would use pay respects in this case. Personally, there is only one situation in which I would use pay my respects towards someone who is alive. If someone takes over as the boss of your company, you might go pay your respects by making a polite visit. In that sense, it's a first visit to show respect to someone in a position of authority. Liz Truss recently took over as Prime Minister of the UK. I imagine that a number of people came by to pay their respects in the day or two after she assumed that office. People made polite visits to acknowledge and respect her authority as Prime Minister. Today's quote of the week is by the author H.G. Wells. He wrote a famous book called The Time Machine. It came out in 1895. This novel was the first time the word time machine was used to mean a device that carries you forward or backward in time. Now, that's a common concept now in science fiction and movies, and maybe in our imaginations. But the term started somewhere, and it started with H.G. Wells. But he has some words for those of us who do not live inside science fiction books and movies. And here's what he said. We all have our time machines. Those that take us back are memories, and those that carry us forward are dreams. So that's all for today. A sad occasion for sure. On Thursday's lesson, we'll talk about how Queen Elizabeth II became queen. When King Charles III, for example, was born, it was immediately clear that he was the first in line to succeed his mother. He's been waiting his whole life for this job, but it was almost the opposite with Queen Elizabeth II. And for that, we'll be going back in history a bit. So that's coming up on Thursday. But for now, remember, this was lesson 506 of Plain English, and the full lesson is at plainenglish.com/506. That's all for today. See you on Thursday.